everybody, and welcome to a special episode of the Dissecting Fiction podcast. I'm Vinny Murphy.
I'm Christian Cutler.
And today we're going to be talking about that glorious last little arc of the Clone Wars.
I was surprised by how good it was. I did expect a few more twists in there.
There's something that hit me immediately when that opening scroll hits, that this is really kind of episode 2, which was episode 2. And then we got the Clone Wars animated film, which is, let's be honest, not the greatest thing produced.
No, it has Stinky the Hut in it.
I mean, that part's cool. I don't mind it. But Clone Wars, the show, really changed episode 3. It gave it so much more of a context than it ever had, and it made a lot of the things that you could perceive as being really bad feel even worse, because now you knew clones, you knew Jedi, which is something you don't really get in episodes 2 and 3.
No, you just kind of know them by their lightsaber covers. Samuel L. Jackson's probably the greatest example of that.
Yeah, and you have attachment obviously to Anakin and Obi-Wan from the other films, but episode 3 rode really heavily on you knowing what was coming next. And it probably is the best of the 3 prequel films, even so. But everyone felt that there was more to the Clone Wars, and the Clone Wars series really presented that. I feel almost like these last 4 episodes of the Clone Wars are kind of not really the series. They're like their own little movie that wraps up the things that kind of should have been in episode 3.
Because they do all flow into each other, and they're all just kind of titled like part 1, part 2, part 3, part 4 at the beginning of each of them. Other 8 episodes before that kind of have nothing to do with this, which frustrated me quite a bit when I was watching that season. I mean, the last 4 episodes I think are really great because they are meaning for the fans to give them that conclusion they crave with the Clone Wars, because that 7th season of Clone Wars didn't really wrap up much of the plot that they were hanging from season 6 and 5.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I would agree with the views on the episodes prior to this in this season. Just to go into it, we start off the season with a story about a group called the Bad Batch, which were kind of like the A-team of clones.
Yeah,
had cool abilities and things, and that was fine. I didn't have any problem with that.
It just felt weird introducing them so late.
So late on in the game, yeah.
I would have been fine if it was season 2, but it's the last season, and you're introducing these superhero clones where at this point the clones are pretty well established to be not that extraordinary. They're smart, but they're not extraordinary in any way.
It seems like just sort of something for someone else to pick up in a book or a comic, which was fine. It was, I would say those episodes, those first 4 are entertaining, and I was okay with that.
Yeah, and it gave you a lot with Echo and Rex, which are fan favorite clones at this point anyway, and they're arguably the main clones out of all the Clone Wars. I wasn't sure why they really needed to bring back Echo, but I do appreciate Echo and Rex at least being able to say goodbye to each other.
And that's really the best part of that. Next up, we get an Ahsoka arc. Essentially, the entire point of this is after she leaves the Order, you get to see what happens immediately following that, and it brings
nothing.
Right, it brings her back into contact with Bo-Katan, which is really important. But holy crap, did that feel like 4 episodes of nothing?
It really did. I don't like the Martine sisters at all. I feel like they're completely unnecessary characters. I also think they're really shallow characters, which is weird because we spent 4 episodes with them. But the thing that was driving me mad is when they're on the planet, Ahsoka escapes the jail 5 different times in 2 episodes.
And Bo-Katan just watching her, it really could have been 1 episode. Yeah. It was if we only needed to get that far, why are we doing 4 episodes here? Well,
it's just weird because Bo-Katan approaches her in the garage that they started out in, because the whole plot is that Ahsoka literally crashes into a garage and is ran by 2 sisters who basically do schemes. They go on a drug heist. And it's them hopping from drug lord to drug lord trying to get off the planet, and the whole time Bo-Katan's just kind of awkwardly watching them and kind of doing nothing. Once they get off the planet, Bo-Katan approaches them and it's just hey, I need your help.
Yeah, and I guess the philosophical point is supposed to be oh, the Jedi really have failed the people, but we knew that already.
It just felt so sloppy in that regard too, because it's like, oh yeah, the Jedi were chasing the criminal, and then like a citizen died, and it just felt like the most roundabout way to explore that.
So, I mean, the one good thing about this is it's set up for complete shock when you get to those last 4 episodes, starting with Old Friends Not Forgotten, which tips you off to this sort of cinematic structure of these last 4, opening with the original Lucasfilm logo, which I like. I think I like giggled when it popped up.
I like that it was like hazy and everything too, like really like classic Lucasfilm logo too. I really appreciated that.
Yeah, and you also get, for the first time in Clone Wars, the actual Star Wars trumpets hit with a red Star Wars logo, which was super cool.
And they didn't. I thought they were going to have the title crawl too. I was expecting that. They didn't even do that.
Well, they went back to their normal, but that normal was showing you all of the Jedi getting in place for their deaths in Episode 3. which made me as excited as a scroll probably would have anyway. I also think that's a nice sort of self-awareness that they're going to give the nod to all the work that everyone had done over all those years, that intro is still their intro, even though they're going a little more cinematic. I really can't speak highly enough of these 4 episodes that really write this extra movie in the Star Wars canon. First off, there's a noticeable attention to detail in everything. The score is phenomenal. I think it's the best animation that team's ever done. And I mean, like, from episode 8 to episode 9, it even feels like it looks a little better.
Well, I think even like the fighting too, you can kind of tell they did a lot of studies on that. They probably did a little motion capturing here and there, because like the fights between several people feel very realistic. Even like the formations that's something like Clone Wars is very good at, is like getting like the feel of war really tight in like these wacky space movies.
And you're dead on with the motion capture. They have talked about this. They did real motion capture on all of those fights, including Ray Park as Darth Maul when fighting as Darth Maul, which is pretty amazing.
But should we recount the plot a little bit more?
Yeah, I think we could kind of go through the episodes and, pick out sort of the important moments. As we were saying, the last arc before this is really just to get Bo-Katan and Ahsoka together.
This mini movie, I guess you would call it, starts off with Anakin and Obi-Wan trying to take a bridge back from the Separatist forces, and Anakin does his wacky Clone Wars tactics of trickery and sabotage, and he blows up the Separatists off the bridge. And it's classic Anakin and classic Obi. Obi-Wan and Anakin report back to Admiral Wolf, and Wolf tells them that he has a special communication from Ahsoka and Bo-Katan. Ahsoka introduces herself and Bo-Katan to Anakin and Obi-Wan, and Bo-Katan says that she is planning to take back Mandalore after apparently Darth Maul took over the city. Obi-Wan is hesitant about this because he's not really willing to give up his forces to go to Mandalore, especially after Mandalore has been very hostile to the Republic for most of the Clone Wars.
So not supposed to go there. I don't remember. I believe there is a treaty.
There's several treaties, and a lot of it is also because Mandalore doesn't super like the Republic because they used to kill Jedi for like sport. So like a Republic presence on Mandalore would piss everybody off. That's usually the explanation they give. Sometimes more complicated than that. But Bo-Katan was forced to flee her home, and she knows Darth Maul is behind it, and she's asking the Jedi Council for help. Obi-Wan's reluctant to give it despite wanting to help them, and he wants to ask the Jedi Council. But before he can ask the Jedi Council, the famous attack on Coruscant happened, which is the opening scene for Episode 3, where, is the famous scene where there's the giant space battle and Grievous captures Palpatine and Count Dooku.
So we established, like, right here that we're now doing sort of an alternate Episode 3.
With Ahsoka back, Anakin shows off that his battalion has actually dressed themselves in honor of Ahsoka with like orange helmets and the white tribal markings and everything. And he's about to give it to Ahsoka, but instead, since Ahsoka is no longer part of the Jedi Order, he instead gives it to Rex and recommends Ahsoka as like an advisor to the battle, and then sends Rex and his battalion, Ahsoka, with Bo-Katan to Mandalore in lieu of sending the entire army to Mandalore because they instead had to protect Coruscant and they have to save the Chancellor. And this snippy back and forth with them saying you're honoring politics over people's lives. And Obi-Wan's like, listen, they're attacking the fucking capital. Like, relax. I'm helping you.
There's also the Jedi Order is supposed to be spread pretty thin at this point. The Separatists are really making like their last big attack, and like Bo-Katan's like request is not seen as the most important thing. The fact that she is getting the 501 to go with them to Mandalore is a pretty big deal. It really, they play up the kind of idea that for all the trouble they put Ahsoka through, they kind of owe her a favor.
Yeah, more or less. And they're pretty worried about Darth Maul, especially after everything that happened with the Night Sisters and the Night Brothers. And they're worried that he's planning something because they are aware that the war is kind of coming to a close, but they're not sure when. So the 501st go to Mandalore, and they begin their offensive to take back Mandalore. And they're basically fighting a bunch of radical Mandalorians, and there's a bunch of cool space lasers and stuff happening. And you do find out the fact that Darth Maul is behind all this.
It's a really great action-y episode. It feels like it's about 5 minutes long, and it's about a half an hour, which is a little longer than most of them. It does immediately feel like you should have been watching them all together, though.
Yeah, because the episode ends pretty immediately with Ahsoka watching one of the clones die and seeing Darth Maul run off into the sewers, and then she rushes after him. And that's when episode 2 starts.
The Phantom Apprentice.
Right, which is an interesting title, and I think a really cool nod to episode 1, because it does reference that Darth Maul was, at one point, the apprentice of Palpatine / Darth Sidious. But episode 2, or part 2, rather, starts with Darth Maul being like, where the fuck is Obi-Wan? I wanted Obi-Wan. And Ahsoka's like, no, I'm here. And then he kind of gets mad about that, but he leaves because ultimately he's kind of sensing that the end is coming for the Clone War. And his big plan is to kind of rise up in the chaos that will follow. Before he leaves, he kind of taunts Ahsoka a bit and tells her that he believes that Darth Sidious, his former master, is engineering everything. And this is his way of engineering his own takeover. Was to take over Mandalore, kill Obi-Wan and Anakin, more likely capture Anakin. I think he kind of backtracks on that a little bit as he learns more.
I think the biggest point here that for the Clone Wars faithful is that Darth Maul knows what's going on with Anakin, and Ahsoka won't believe it.
I mean, he brings that up more directly later. He's kind of like using his Force powers to kind of sense the future, very much like what Yoda did at several points in both the movies and the shows. There's more battles and sieges, but eventually they're able to take the throne room, and they're trying to ferry all the hostages and all the civilians into safe sectors before there's a counterattack by Darth Maul and his gang of terrorists. They're worried about wanting to capture Darth Maul as quickly as possible because they're afraid they might encounter another uprising on Mandalore with the Republic still there. There's more lasers and shooting, and eventually they go back to the throne room to regroup, and Rex, Ahsoka, and Bo-Katan all find that Darth Maul is there waiting for her. They're pretty worried at first, but Darth Maul releases a hostage in good faith that he uses Force powers to find out about Ahsoka with. And then he finds out through that Ahsoka used to be part of the Jedi Order, is not anymore, and that she was Anakin's Padawan at one point. He staged several bombing to draw the attention of both Bo-Katan and Rex so she can have a private conversation with Ahsoka. And this is where Darth Maul reveals that he knows that Anakin's a chosen one, that Anakin's more destined to destroy the Force than to bring balance to it. So he's kind of ahead of the curve on everybody else, and he offers Ahsoka to join him on the dark side and kind of rebuild everything. Unlike Anakin, she refuses, and that's kind of a big pivotal moment at this point. I actually thought she was going to take it there for a second, because she's fought with the Jedi Council like several times before this at this point, and I thought she was kind of going to be willing to join him. But she pulls a ruse on him, and she says she is going to join if he answers one question. And the question is, what do you want with Anakin? And he's like, well, I want him so I can kill him because he's destined to destroy the Force. And she's like, I don't believe. And then there's a big lightsaber fight that's really cool. And then there's more shooties and lasers. Darth Maul actually abandons his terrorist patrol to the 501st Battalion, and they all get arrested as he tries to make his escape. But Ahsoka once again corners him and eventually is able to capture him. And after capturing him, they are able to bring him back to their main Star Destroyer, and they fly off of Mandalore because they're pretty, well, they leave some people behind, like just a small troop, while they drop off Darth Maul to the Republic. But basically, everybody leaves the planet with Darth Maul in a force-sensitive like chamber that the Mandalorians used to have, and they stick him in the brig. And Ahsoka is kind of reflecting on her past as they travel to light speed back to Coruscant with Darth Maul as their prisoner. And this is where Order 66 happens.
I have like a kind of a different viewpoint on that confrontation between Ahsoka and Maul. I saw it largely as Maul pointing out something that Ahsoka knows is true, which is that the Jedi Order is not doing the correct thing. And I felt like that would have been essentially a union between two characters. One's, formerly Sith and one formerly Jedi who were going to try to correct things. There's also this implication that Maul knows that Anakin could have brought balance to the Force, and his choices are what drove everything to shit.
He also does mention that Sidious was manipulating everything, but it is an interesting conversation because it does make you feel sympathy for Maul because he was just a pawn in all of it. And he mentions that Dooku was a pawn, and ultimately Ahsoka and Anakin are pawns in this too. That there's kind of a lack of control and they're being manipulated. Anakin less so because he kind of purposely chose the dark side. Ahsoka's the one that made more conscious choices and more reasonable choices about this.
Yeah, but her ultimate failure is not realizing that her friend could do something like that. And in a lot of ways, I suppose it's kind of this idea that what ends up happening with the Empire and everything is almost Ahsoka's fault too.
Right, yeah, because she doesn't notice that there is an important scene after the capture of Maul that she has a chance to speak to the Jedi Council, but the Jedi Council kind of dismiss her outside of Yoda because she wants to speak to Obi-Wan and she wants to speak to Anakin, but neither of them are there. Obi-Wan's on Utapau chasing down Grievous, and Anakin at that point is spying on Palpatine, and Palpatine slowly turning him to the dark side. Mace Windu gets snippy with Ahsoka and is like, "You can't be here. You're not a Jedi anymore." And instead of telling the Jedi Council what she learned from Maul, that Anakin has some part to play in all of this, she ignores it. And that's where a lot of the implication of her failure comes in.
Yeah, as we move on to the next episode, it's really Ahsoka and Rex who are the characters that we didn't get to learn more about in episode 3. I think this one doesn't have that sort of maybe the gravity that The Phantom Apprentice did. I feel like The Phantom Apprentice is, to me, the culmination of all Clone Wars. I think that is your high point in the story where all of your actions finally come together. And the next 2 episodes, as good as they are more just, okay, here's a little bit of cleanup so you know where all the characters are.
Yeah, it's a lot more action-based, too. There's a lot less, character discussion, unlike with Darth Maul and Ahsoka. I mean, that is the best scene where they're in the throne room together, and they're discussing, the future, and Darth Maul is pretty insistent that everything's about to, come crumbling down around them, and they have to be somewhere else, and Darth Maul's plan ultimately failed. Like we said, Ahsoka didn't really believe him at first, but once Order 66 goes into effect in Episode 3, she realizes that Darth Maul was correct. But before Rex can kill Ahsoka, he hesitates. He tells Ahsoka that she needs to find out about Fives, which is another fan favorite clone, who was also part of a pretty important part of the plot there for a bit. After escaping from the clones trying to hunt her down, she finds out through one of the databases in the ship that Fives found out that all clones had inhibitor chips that were controlled remotely by those on Amino and whoever commissioned all these soldiers in the first place, which is Palpatine, of course. So in order to escape, Ahsoka frees Darth Maul to cause some chaos, and he causes some chaos. He's cutting people's head off, chopping their arms off, and just using it as a rich wash. It is wild what he.
Yeah, I think it's the most violent the show has ever gotten, in a very on-screen way.
Yeah.
Obviously, even starting in season 1, clones die super quick. That's part of what that makes that show work is it is uncertainty. and always has been. Yeah, but it was jarring to have a character that violent on screen in the animated series. But I think that's also a nice little nod to what Disney Plus is doing with their programming. Is they're not going to hold back from what the audience is looking for. And like, obviously, no one's looking for a rated R Star Wars here, but this is going to be as dark as it's ever been.
No, it's brutal. Like you see heads like rolling around on the ground and everything. They're all freaking out. It's a really cool scene. But with Darth Maul like just slaughtering people on the ship, Ahsoka is able to capture Rex thanks to the help of some droids, and she is able to remove the chip from his brain by basically using the Force and some droids.
Yeah,
And with
some droids you may recognize from some episodes you may not have liked.
yes, the droid art.
Oh, jeez. We should do it. We should, when we do the Clone Wars like full thing, we should do just an episode on the droid arc, like a mini episode.
I try not to think of it.
Yeah. But this episode, really ends with Rex having his free will, and now they're in this questionable Star Destroyer.
She is able to free Rex, and he doesn't really get any time to feel remorse about it. He does apologize, but he's kind of freaking out because he realizes all his brothers, all these people he's fight with, are now ready to kill him and kill essentially his best friend. She does say that she's not willing to kill anybody else because they are all her friends, despite just releasing Darth Maul on the ship. And he's like walking around carrying a severed arm and everything. But she does, they do try to get off the ship, and their big plan originally was to steal one of the ships from the hangars. There's some wacky hijinks there with the droids, like moving the gravity, classic Star Wars stuff, like shutting out the gravity, moving parts around. Unfortunately, as they try to escape, Darth Maul is able to steal the last ship before taken off on the hangar. And that forces Rex and Ahsoka to go into maintenance and try to find a new ship. But as the ship is going forward, it starts to crash into the planet. That is also because of Darth Maul essentially just blowing up their reactor in the ship and is just about to crash.
It's a really cool sequence just because, you rarely see characters in Star Wars trying not to kill people as they're like moving through stuff. And so it adds to the action where you're just getting a lot of really unique scenarios.
Right, yeah. Like here's one guy like utterly just like tearing this ship apart, just trying to do everything possible to get off of it. And here's Ahsoka like going out of right to like not kill anybody. But unfortunately, because they're Darth Maul, the ship is going to crash. But the clones are so focused on killing Ahsoka, they're not really even focused on like saving the ship in any possible way. But Rex and Ahsoka are able to escape, but the ship crashes onto the moon. But after it crashes, Ahsoka and Rex go back there and they basically bury all their friends in a mass grave.
They also kind of probably intentionally mislead the burgeoning empire that they have also passed at that point.
Right. I get the feeling that Anakin kind of knew. The very, very last scene it implies that it's maybe a year later, maybe a few months later. I'm not sure how this planet works because the wreckage is covered in salt. I thought it was Hoth originally, but it turns out to be some kind of weird mineral. And Anakin is there, and he's looking at this mass grave, and he finds Ahsoka's lightsaber because once she finishes building this grave, she abandons her lightsabers and leaves with Rex.
And we know what happened, after that because of Rebels, but there's still a decent gap there. But this is a much more satisfying ending than we got with the Lost episodes. Also, the simple fact that it's a character moment with Darth Vader before the original trilogy, after the Clone Wars, where like you kind of learn to love the character, and now there is that actual emotion behind it now.
I thought it was a really interesting directing choice that they didn't focus on his face at all as he picked up that lightsaber. Like, it's a very far away, like, wide shot. And you don't really get to see any of his, like, body language or anything. I think that's a really interesting way to kind of put into the viewer what they think about Darth Vader. You can kind of either think he's thinking about regret or if he thinks Ahsoka is dead, whatever. And that very last shot with him walking away and is reflected in that stormtrooper's helmet, I think is really cool and very like symbolic about him kind of abandoning Ahsoka and abandoning what made the 501st important to him, because this is his battalion that he's looking at the graves of.
That's like the beauty of what, Dave Filoni's been able to do, running this show. Is Star Wars was always driven, even when like you had the EU, which was not official, that extra sort of narrative is always driven by like the emotional attachments between characters that you don't get to play out too much in the movies. Now we did get to play them out, and now, it's originally it always felt like it was a sad story with Vader because it was Luke's father and he's able to bring him back to the light side at the end. This is now like a sad story because Anakin, who you've actually spent more time with than you have Luke, was manipulated by this like absolute bastard who then manipulates people for like another like 40 years.
Right, and like even beyond that, like everything he loves is gone and more or less hates them at this point, even if they did survive. And he's basically just in a walking like coffin as like a suit. Like he's not able to do or enjoy anything, and it's very like I think it's very satisfying too, because out of like everything the Clone Wars does, it does a lot to characterize Anakin as like not a bad person, but just very impulsive and very eager to save everybody through like trickery and by ignoring the rules, like a hotshot.
We've talked about this, and we talked about this a lot in the Rise of Skywalker episode. The strength of Star Wars now is this sort of like unending narrative that doesn't even need to push into the future, that there's so much going on that we can like talk about the characters and their interactions forever, and then we can do completely different characters who have completely different interactions. But Vader is now like a complete character in a way that he never was before, and that's really cool.
Yeah, he actually feels tragic now, because like when episode 3 came out, it was like the tragedy isn't there. Like there's so many memes from that movie that are supposed to be serious, and they're just inherently funny. Like Anakin being lit on fire by the lava planet, he's just screaming, "I hate you," or like him screaming "No" when he's finally in the Darth Vader suit. Like all that stuff becomes like so unintentionally hilarious, but like here they do a lot to fix that and do a lot to like kind of bring your attention to like what this character must have felt going through all of this.
Yeah, and you now have a lot of adult fans who, grew up with the prequels being as prominent as the original trilogy. And I think that effect's been there longer than a lot of people have acknowledged. Like, you can, like, if you pull the Vader stuff out of context in episode 3, yeah, you can laugh at it, but you can laugh at anything. Comedy is something that's weird. Like, it's not, like horror and comedy are almost like the exact same reaction. It's just whether you're threatened by it or not. Like, I think now you're going to have a generation that does not find episode 3 funny at all and is going to see like Anakin like almost burning to death and then being trapped in a robotic suit for the rest of his like miserable life is like a real terrible thing.
Well, I think they're able to see like both sides of it. Because like there is an aspect where like that scene is just like funny to watch mostly. Just because like the dialogue's really weird and like the setting is really weird. And like how Anakin is like burnt is really weird. But I think I don't think it's like one thing there. I think like fans are able to kind of see both sides of it now. Like they can see what George Lucas wanted and see like what he actually did.
Yeah, and we know that, from a lot of interviews that Filoni has, continued contact and continued working with Lucas, even though, like, Lucas doesn't need to do anything now. They've worked together to really craft a lot of this, and I think that's important. Look, we went from, in about 20 years, seeing, like, everyone thinking Lucas is going to, like, knock it out of the park with, like, episode 1, and he doesn't. And you had this, like, hatred towards Lucas for a while, and now we're back 20 years from there, and people are starting to get it that, like, yeah, he's not a perfect director, and yeah, episode 1 and 2 have a lot of problems, but there was a consistent vision.
Right. I mean, it seemed like there was a very clear idea of what like George Lucas wanted, but it took like a lot of other like writers getting involved and kind of guiding those original ideas to their core, to their realization. Because George Lucas has always been pretty good about like letting other creators kind of do what they want within Star Wars.
Now we're getting kind of past like how emotional and how like well written this was in the
Yeah.
context of all of the characters involved. There's also like a lot of fun stuff in these too. Like we do get to see Dryden Voss pop up as a little tip off to Solo. That sure as shit looked like Prince Shizor as well. We see a young Kanan in one of the shots. There's a lot of nods to everything else, which is now a huge part of Star Wars, is keeping that consistency that, you know, if we're going to say this is continuity, it's continuity.
Right. They even mentioned Saw Gerrera at one point,
Yep.
which felt very awkward, but you know, it worked.
Yeah, but I mean, he's. I mean, that's where he's from. Is that show? It's his native media.
But it is, yeah. I guess there was a point where we kind of got away from like what made these 4 episodes like really important is like kind of going through Ahsoka's journey, like emotional journey through all of this, and stating like the end of her world. It's less about like Anakin and everybody else, and more just about like what Ashoka and Darth Maul felt, which is something like the Clone Wars has always been good about.
Yeah, and I would agree with that, but I think the beauty of it is by doing that, it makes everyone's arcs so much more interesting. Even Obi-Wan, we didn't even talk about that. How he's like, you know, not super sure about what Ahsoka wants to do, and there's just enriched so many characters in 2 hours time. I think that brings us to really the end of this one. We are going to continue with Star Wars content, guys. We wanted to do this episode because we had, done the whole thing on Disney Star Wars. We feel like this is another big moment in Disney Star Wars. So that's why you're getting this little episode here. Christian, what do you think next? Do you want to do the prequels?
Yeah, I can do the prequels. I think they're more relevant now than they ever were, just because of like how much has come out of those 3 movies and how much is being continually built upon them more than like ever has been from the original.
And I completely agree with that. So, guys, later in 2020, expect an episode on George Lucas's Star Wars prequel trilogy. There could be stuff before that, too. We're going to have to see what kind of news pops up. For now, if you guys are looking for some activities while you're stuck inside, check out ToyStoreGuide.com. Dave's did a great job of getting a bunch of toy stores, comic book stores on there. They need your support probably more than they have in a very long time. Most of them have ways you can contact them for internet or contactless ordering. We're on all sorts of social media. We're going to keep trying to keep current with a bunch of these topics, so make sure to follow us. Just type in Dissecting Fiction. You're going to find us. We're not too concerned about that aspect of it. Like, share, do all that good stuff. And Christian, you have anything?
Check out No One's Rose from Vault Comics. It's a pretty neat comic book that came out right before before the pandemic, and it's from an indie publisher, and it's cool. It's neat.
Excellent. All right. Well, I think that brings us to the end of this another adventure, an alternate adventure into a galaxy far, far away.
Episode 3.5.
Yeah, episode 3. Someone's going to make like a supercut of this, right?
And put it into episode 3. I hope so.
Yeah, I'm into it. But until then, I'm Vinny Murphy.
I'm Christian Kutlick.
And may the force be with you. Ooh, see what I did there?